The life I once had was the life everyone envied. We had the house, the cars, and a picture-perfect family. I married Mark when I was 24, and from the outside, everything seemed perfect. We were the couple that everyone looked up to. Mark was successful, well-liked, charming, and always the life of the party. And me, I was proud of him. I thought I had the perfect husband. We met in college. He was charismatic, the kind of person who could charm anyone into believing that he was genuine. His smile was disarming, and his laugh was contagious. At first, everything was amazing. He was the kind of man who would surprise me with flowers, plan spontaneous date nights, and constantly reassure me that I was the most important person in his life. He told me I was beautiful, smart, and that I was everything he'd ever wanted. But then, the cracks began to show. At first, it was small things, subtle things that I pushed aside because I didn't want to believe it. He would get irritated over the smallest issues, then apologize profusely afterward, promising it would never happen again. I told myself that every relationship had its ups and downs, that no marriage was perfect. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The first time I truly felt the weight of his anger wasn't until after we had our first child, Ethan. The stress of parenthood had started to take a toll, and suddenly, Mark's temper seemed to be more volatile. It wasn't anything violent. At first he would raise his voice when things didn't go his way, and I would just retreat, hoping he would calm down. I'd apologize, even though I didn't know what I was apologizing for, just to keep the peace. But then, one night, everything changed. We were having dinner at home, just the two of us after a long day. Ethan had just gone to bed, and I was tidying up the kitchen. Mark was talking about a promotion at work, something that had been bothering him. As he spoke, I noticed he was getting more frustrated. His hands were clenched into fists, and his voice was rising. I asked him to calm down, but I didn't realize how far I had gone. I asked him in a soft tone, trying to ease the tension, but it didn't work. In an instant, he slammed his hand on the table, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Anger, real anger. I froze. The room seemed to shrink round me. His eyes bored into mine, and the words that came out of his mouth were like daggers. "You never listen to me," he growled, his voice thick with fury. "You always have something to say, but you never understand." I backed away, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to do. My body was frozen, but my mind was racing. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the man who had promised to love me forever. But in that moment, Mark pulled himself back together. He immediately apologized, saying he didn't mean it. He told me he was under a lot of pressure at work. He begged me to forgive him, promising that he would never raise his voice again. And I believed him. That was the beginning of a cycle that would last for years. A cycle of anger and apology. He would lash out, and then, like clockwork, he would apologize. He would bring me gifts, flowers, sweet words that made me feel like I was the most important person in his life. He would cry, beg me to forgive him, and tell me how much he loved me. And because I loved him too, I believed him. But the pattern continued, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. He didn't just yell anymore. The next time, it was pushing. Then it was shoving. Then one day, he slapped me. The slap wasn't just physical. It was the moment I realized that the man I had married was hiding something far darker than I ever imagined. I was terrified, but I didn't know how to leave. Where would I go? How could I explain this to anyone? He had a way of making me feel isolated, as if the world would never understand. I was trapped in a situation I couldn't escape, but I still didn't want to admit it to myself. I kept telling myself it would get better. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase, but it wasn't. The slap wasn't just a physical assault. It was the moment I realized that the man I married was someone completely different from the person I thought I knew. The man I loved had become a stranger, a man who was capable of hurting me, a man who, beneath the charm and smiles, was hiding a dark. That night, I spent hours sitting in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror, my cheek throbbing. I could feel the sting of shame and confusion. How had it come to this? How had I ended up in this situation? I kept thinking about all the promises he had made, the ones that reassured me it was just a phase, just stress, and that he would never hurt me again. But I knew deep down that it wasn't just stress. This was who he was. I was ashamed to admit it, but part of me was also scared to confront the reality. I didn't want to see the truth. It was easier to pretend that this was all just an accident. But the marks on my body and the bruises on my spirit were impossible to ignore. The next morning, Mark acted as though nothing had happened. He apologized, of course, but it was different this time. It was colder, more distant. He apologized, but there was no real emotion behind it. His words felt empty, rehearsed, like he had said them 100 times before. He gave me flowers, told me he was sorry, promised he would never do it again. But I knew better now. I had been living in a lie. For years, I had convinced myself that things were just a phase, that the anger would eventually subside. But the truth was staring me in the face. This was never going to stop. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't let anyone know what was happening behind closed doors. Mark was too charming in public. He was the perfect husband in front of others. No one would believe me. And even if they did, what would I do? Leave? Where would I go? How could I provide for myself and for Ethan? It was easier to stay. Easier to pretend that nothing had changed. Easier to tell myself that if I just stayed quiet, if I kept everything to myself, maybe things would go back to normal. But they didn't. And one day, it happened again. This time, it wasn't a slap. It was a shove. The force sent me crashing into the kitchen counter, the impact knocking the wind out of me. My head hit the counter so hard that I saw stars. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. When I looked up, I saw Mark standing over me, his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes were wild, filled with rage, and yet there was no remorse in his expression. "You don't listen to me. You never listen," he shouted, his voice booming in the small room. I tried to scramble to my feet, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I felt dizzy, nauseous. Everything was spinning, and I could barely catch my breath. Tears filled my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly, afraid that if I showed any weakness, it would make him angrier. I knew this pattern by now. I knew how this would go. He would calm down, and he would apologize. He would beg me to forgive him, telling me that it wasn't his fault. He would say anything to make me believe that it wasn't his fault. But deep down, I knew it was. It always was. This time, though, something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep lying to myself, pretending that everything would be okay. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay. That night, as Mark slept, I packed my things. Slowly, quietly, I gathered what I could: clothes, some of Ethan's things, and my most important documents. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. I woke Ethan up and told him we had to leave. I didn't know how I was going to explain it to him. I didn't know if he would understand. But I knew that I had to do this. For him, for me. We had to leave. The next few days were a blur. I found a shelter for women and children who had escaped abusive situations. It wasn't much, just a small, temporary home, but it was a start. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't trapped anymore. I wasn't hiding. But the journey didn't end there. Leaving was just the beginning. The fear didn't go away. It lingered in the back of my mind every day, every night. I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to show up, waiting for him to find me and drag me back into his world of control. But that was the difference. Now I had a choice. Now I could fight back. I filed for divorce, and I made sure to take every step to protect myself and Ethan. It wasn't easy. The process was long, and the legal battles were exhausting. But every day I woke up, knowing that I was free, made it worth it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and hard decisions. Leaving Mark was the hardest thing I had ever done, but also the most empowering. The hardest part wasn't leaving him physically. It was leaving him mentally and emotionally. For years, he had convinced me that I was nothing without him, that I couldn't survive on my own. And even though I knew the truth, there was still a part of me that doubted my own worth. But that part of me, the part that was afraid, the part that was broken, was slowly fading away. Every day I woke up, I reminded myself that I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was going to make sure that my son, Ethan, would never have to live through the same fear and pain that I had. Living in the shelter was humbling. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself or for Ethan. We had gone from living in a beautiful home to a small, temporary room with shared bathrooms and limited privacy. But I tried to make it work. I tried to make it a safe space for Ethan, a space where he could feel protected and loved. I decorated the walls with drawings, tried to create a routine, did everything I could to make it feel like home. But it wasn't just the physical space that needed healing. I knew that emotionally, Ethan and I were both scarred. For weeks, he would wake up crying, asking when we could go home, asking when Daddy would be coming back. Every time I held him, I could feel the weight of the pain in his little body, and it broke my heart. I spent hours talking to him, explaining that we were safe now, that we were okay. I did my best to reassure him that his father was not a part of our lives anymore, but it was hard. He didn't understand. How could he? He was just a child, and as much as I tried to shield him from the truth, I knew he had seen the fear in my eyes, felt the tension in our home. I knew that he would carry the scars of this experience with him, just as I would. But no matter how much pain I felt, no matter how much I wanted to cry, I know I couldn't. I had to be strong for Ethan. I had to show him that we could start over, that we could rebuild our lives from the ashes of what had been. Over the following months, I found a job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I worked long hours, often exhausted by the end of the day, but I kept going. I kept fighting. Every paycheck was a reminder that I was making progress, that I was building a life for myself and for Ethan. Slowly, I started to gain back the confidence I had lost. The more independent I became, the less I thought about Mark. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worthy. I know it now. I also started going to therapy, something I had never done before. It was difficult at first. I didn't want to talk about the pain, didn't want to relive the memories. But the therapist was kind, and she helped me unpack the years of trauma, helped me understand the impact of living in an abusive relationship. Therapy became a safe space for me to process the anger, the shame, the fear, and slowly, it became easier to talk about it. It became easier to forgive myself. One of the hardest things I had to accept was that I couldn't change the past. I couldn't go back and make different choices. I couldn't erase the scars or the pain that I had endured. But I could control what happened next. I could choose how I moved forward. and I chose to move forward with strength, with courage, and with hope. I started to rebuild my relationship with Ethan, too. I wanted him to know that he was loved, that he was safe. I didn't want him to carry the weight of what had happened with him forever. So I made a promise to him. I promised that I would protect him, that I would always be there for him, and that together we would heal. And then, one day, I realized something that I never thought I would feel again. Peace. For the first time since I could remember, I felt at peace with myself. I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. I didn't feel the suffocating weight of fear anymore. I was free. We were free. And that freedom, that simple, precious freedom, was worth everything. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living fully. I started doing things for myself. I went back to school, enrolled in courses that had always interested me, and began to explore my passions. I even started dating again, something I never thought I would do. I wasn't looking for someone to fill the void Mark had left. I was looking for someone to stand beside me, a partner, not a savior. I still had bad days. I still had moments when the pain of the past would sneak up on me. But I didn't let it define me anymore. I had learned that it was okay to have bad days. What mattered was how I rose from them. The months after I left Mark felt like a rebirth. There was still pain, still moments of doubt. But there was also something else, a sense of freedom I had never known before. I had started to heal, not just from the physical abuse, but from the emotional scars that had been left behind. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, and I was ready to live fully. It wasn't easy. Every day was a choice to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it seemed. But each step I took made me stronger. Each step I took showed me that I wasn't the broken person I had once thought I was. I was resilient. I was capable. I was a mother who loved her child fiercely and would do anything to protect him. And most importantly, I was no longer afraid. Even and I settled into our new routine. It wasn't perfect, but it was us. We were safe. I saw the light returning to Ethan's eyes. He was laughing more, playing with the other kids, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the joy in his face that had been missing. He was healing too, and that was everything to me. As time went on, I started to rebuild my sense of self. I found joy in small things. I took walks in the park, went out with friends, and slowly began to reclaim the woman I had lost. There was no more fear, no more walking on eggshells. I made new memories, good memories, with Ethan. We traveled, we laughed, and we learned together that life didn't have to be lived in silence or fear. It could be filled with love, peace, and the occasional adventure. But the healing didn't stop with me. It continued with Ethan. He had seen things no child should ever see, but he had also learned something incredible through this experience. He had learned that love wasn't about control or fear. Love was about respect, kindness, and safety. And that was the lesson I wanted him to carry forward with him for the rest of his life. There were times when the memories would resurface, and I would find myself overwhelmed with the weight of everything I had gone through. But in those moments, I remembered how far I had come. I remembered the nights when I felt like I would never escape, the days when I didn't think I could keep going. And I remembered the strength that I had found inside myself. And then, one day, I met someone. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't ready for love, I thought. But he was patient. He understood the pain I had gone through, and he didn't rush me. He didn't try to fix me. He simply showed up. He listened when I needed to talk, gave me space when I needed it, and supported me in ways I never thought possible. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't happen overnight. But over time, I realized something. I was worthy of love, The kind of love that didn't come with fear. The kind of love that didn't demand anything in return. The kind of love that was safe. I took it slow. I wanted to make sure I was ready, that I was whole before I allowed someone into my life. And as time passed, I found that I wasn't just healed, I was thriving. The moment I knew I had fully healed came on a quiet evening, when Ethan and I were sitting on the couch, watching an old movie. He looked up at me and smiled, his face soft with contentment. "Mom, I'm happy," he said. And in that moment, I realized that we had both survived the storm. We had both found our way back to happiness. I wasn't the woman I had been before. I wasn't the woman who had been afraid to speak up, the woman who had been silenced by fear. I was someone else now, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knew that no matter what happened, I could get through it. Mark was no longer a part of our lives, and in a way, that was the greatest victory. I had won back my life, my strength, and my peace. I had broken free from the chains of abuse, and in doing so, I had become the person I was always meant to be.